Insulation is an absolutely critical factor in any home building, especially a tiny house. It's a very small space, so you should make sure that your tiny house is very well insulated. All our tiny homes come as standard double glazed windows, and then in the walls are fully insulated with what we call Earthwill, which I have a piece here. This is made from recycled glass bottles, and so it's a pretty good product there. And sorry, it's a bit dirty, it's just an offcut from the workshop. That is in the walls. Now that is rated at what they call R2. We also put it in the ceiling, R2 in the ceiling between the rafters. But on top of that, before we put the Colorbond down on the roof, we do use this one, which is the same thing, but it has what's called foil backed. So before we lay the roof sheets, we lay this down, and then the roof sheeting goes on top of it. So the very first layer of defense we have is an Earthwill foil backed blanket. Then just under that we have an R2 insulation in the ceiling, and in the walls we have an R2 insulation back. A very common question we get is, can I have R3 or 5 or higher? The answer to that is no. You can't. You simply can't, because the issue is the thickness of the wall. So the wall cavity is set, and we insulate it to the maximum thickness insulation we can, which is R2. If you go to something like an R3 or an R4, it requires a thicker wall cavity, and no one wants to lose more space on the inside of a tiny house. So we really are at the maximum. We can't put any more insulation in the walls or the ceiling. It's full. It's totally full. So you've got to remember that the first R, the R1, accounts for a vast majority of the insulation that you do require in a house. And if you're talking about a house that was built sort of before 1980, the insulation value on that is almost zero in a lot of cases. There's no insulation used. So as soon as you put an R1 insulation in a wall on a new house or a tiny house, there's a significant gain than you used to be living in. We fill it with an R2, and so a lot of people think, oh, that's double. It's not double at all. It's just a little bit more. It's actually an exponential curve, and so as you go from, say, R1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the curve sort of flattens out. So don't think that if you ask me for R4 insulation that you're going to get twice as good insulation that R2 that we're already doing. We're already covering most of the insulation that's really available, or at least felt by the human body. Admittedly, if you were to put this tiny house under a testing with scientific devices, yes, you would see an increase in performance, but to the human body, we're talking a very minor difference. It's not worth the extra money. It's not even possible unless we made the studs thicker, which we're not going to do, because you're not going to want a smaller internal space on your tiny house. So that's insulation covered for the walls and the ceiling. If you do require additional insulation in the floor, we use a product from Kingspan. It's a thermofoil board. They have different thicknesses. Again, this one creates pretty much the first R1 layer, and that's directly stuck to the underside of the floor, which we cut around the steel frame of the trailer. Admittedly, it's not perfect because you've got the wheel arches, and it's impossible to put that inside the wheel arches. Once it's to site, you can add that if you'd like. It is extra. It is an expensive product itself. There's a lot of labour involved. Whether it's worth it or not would depend where you're going to take your tiny house. So if you're going to a very cold climate, I would highly recommend it, because anything is better than nothing. But if you're going to more temperate climate, or I don't think it's overly necessary, but it is available to you if you'd like. So that's insulation covered. Hopefully that's answered your questions, and I'll see you on the next video.
Thank you.